Good morning or good afternoon to one and all, wherever you are in this online world, members of the media, both traditional and social, members of the university, and of course, members of the global public. Welcome to this third SALISES Forum, but the second installment of the forum, looking at the managing of the education system in the context of COVID-19 and its ramifications, implications, call it what you will. So I want to welcome you all on board, and particularly to welcome all the presenters who have taken time from their busy schedule to share with us their experiences, their views or perspectives on our present COVID-19 related challenges in relation to education and learning. Let me now hand over to my present acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCree, the chair of this proceeding, and all protocols observed. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to once again welcome each and every one of you to the virtual SALISES Forum. This is the third installment of our forums, and it is entitled Managing the National Education System, the COVID-19 Pandemic, Lessons Learned, and Charting a Progressive Agenda. I particularly want to welcome once again all of the participants who are in the virtual space, and especially our esteemed cast of panelists who have willingly agreed to deliver their insights, of course coming from various perspectives that addresses the main theme of today's forum. Our panelists include Justice Anthony Gafford, Ms. Carleen Haynes, Father Gregory Augustine, Dr. Indira Rampasad, Dr. Olabisi Kuboni, and Professor Gerard Hutchinson. This is indeed an impressive lineup, and it is consistent with SALISES and its venture to reach out to various publics in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean region, and internationally with respect to our entrees into development policy issues. As many of you may know, SALISES prides itself as a development policy think tank. And we here in St. Augustine are just one of the branches of 3 branches of SALISES, the other 2 being on the Mona campus and on the Caville campus. And together, SALISES Regional, as we call the 3 branches when they come together, engage in fora that celebrate and at the same time promote the importance of development policies as they relate to agendas and important agendas in various Caribbean domains, as well as the Global South in particular. So it is with great pleasure that I welcome each and every one of you to yet another exciting engagement when SALISES does what it does best in terms of convening meetings, engaging in research, participating in seminars, coordinating seminars, and bringing to you, the members of the public, the best minds and the best thinkers and the best researchers who have clever insights to address the themes that we choose to speak on when we embark upon promoting these agendas. So I can assure you that in the future, in 2022, we will be continuing with these forums and you can expect a number of exciting topics to be on our agenda on a monthly basis, and we look forward to your continuous contribution and participation as we chat this important discourse that, from my vantage point and from the vantage point of my colleagues, can only redound to the benefit of the region and all the major players who contribute to development process. So at this point, I thank you, and I turn you over to the chairperson who will commence the proceedings. Thank you very much, all of you, and I hope that you enjoy the proceedings today.
Thank you again, Dr. St. Bernard. And as we begin, the presenters have already been told that you have 10 minutes to make your presentation, and I would give you a 2-minute warning to wrap up. Please excuse me for interrupting your delivery in reminding you of your 2 minutes of time remaining. So we want to get the ball rolling with Professor Justice Anthony Gafour, who has the privilege of opening the batting or bowling this morning. Justice Anthony Gafour is chairman of the Tax Appeal Court of Trinidad and Tobago. He's a barrister of Gray's Inn and has practiced extensively in the UK in family, criminal law, tax, and commercial matters. He holds bachelor's degrees in law, majoring in family and international law, divinity, philosophy, and the classics, as well as master's degrees in law, theological studies, finance, and financial law, among others. I now wish to invite Justice Gafour to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCree, Chair of this morning's proceedings. And of course, I'm also greatly indebted to Dr. St. Bernard and SALISES for your kind invitation to share with you a few short remarks in respect of the topic for today. So let's see if I can hopefully share my screen. I don't know whether you can see the screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So the Irish philosopher Edmund Burke's description of society as but a contract between the dead, the living, and those yet to be born has particular resonance in the context of COVID-19. Lockdown has required many of our youngest citizens, those deemed to be least at risk from COVID-19 infection, to endure educational, social, and emotional isolation and dislocation in order to protect the oldest and most vulnerable in society. What I propose to do is to briefly set the scene for today and then to move on to some of the other points as you see on the screen, hopefully. Children all over the world have shared similar but not identical experiences during the past 2 years. The most common and most noticeable effects of COVID-19 were school closures and lockdowns, where siblings, parents, and other household members stayed at home day in and day out, and physical relationships and interactions with friends and relatives were restricted or completely banned for weeks and months. The toll on some children was even greater, and life for children in detention or children with parents in detention was exceptionally hard, as physical contact was banned for months and replaced by virtual visits. Children who shared their time between two households, usually following parental separation, could not always move from one home to the other, experiencing disruption of their care and relationships. UNESCO estimates that the pandemic has affected nearly 90% of the world's students. That's approximately 1.54 billion learners out of schools in 185 countries. And this has given rise to certain concerns over the breach of human rights, particularly children's rights, which is what I've been asked to reflect on today. So let me turn now to the domestic educational system and COVID-19. And this comprises principally the Education Act of Trinidad and Tobago, which makes no specific provision for the rights of children, but the minister is required to make adequate provision for educational facilities at the early childhood, primary and secondary levels especially. The draft education policy 2017-2022 also does not speak to the issue of children's rights, albeit that it alludes to the need for collaboration and communication with stakeholders in education. And that supposedly would include children and their parents, guardians, or caregivers. It does, however, helpfully reiterate and recognize as a human right that education is a fundamental right and essential for the exercise of all other human rights. This also raises the question as to the roles of rights holders, who would be the children, and rights bearers, who would be principally the officials such as the minister and those who assist her in the discharge of her duties. Now, the right to an education is framed within the international context, principally and initially from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted in 1948 and proclaims that children in childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. And it was some 4 decades later, back in 1989, that we saw what is now the seminal convention in relation to the rights of children, being the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this was developed to provide further guidance on the full spectrum of rights that children, who are defined as people under the age of 18, are entitled to. However, neither of these documents would have anticipated the scale of digital transformation and the influence of digital technology in all aspects of our lives, and particularly those of our children. And so therefore, this is an issue which I think needs to or requires further examination. Apart from those 2 conventions, you also have the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, all of which provide an essential framework for dealing with children's rights. In relation to the UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, this particularly focuses on the importance of free and compulsory education and the equality of educational opportunity, and also prohibits all forms of discrimination. And there are particular provisions in that, particularly Article 3, which emphasizes that the rights of the child are of paramount consideration, and also Article 28, which formally recognizes the right of a child to an education. Now, in a recent case in South Africa, the case of the Center for Child Law and the Minister of Basic Education, the courts there held that government directions for the phased return to school, which excluded learners with disabilities and also required the closure of special schools where compliance with social distancing rules were impossible, violated the right to inclusive education and substantive equality of learners. And I want to suggest that this authority may be of some relevance given the commonality of the systems of law that are used here as well as in South Africa. Turning to the challenges to children's rights posed by COVID-19, these are manifold. And 2 such examples are the risks of violence against children, both online as well as reporting and the identification mechanisms which have faced difficulties in continuing to operate to protect children. Further, education has not been enjoyed equally by all during this period, while an increased move to e-learning presents new children's rights challenges, as not all children have access equally to digital technology. Indeed, there are many in vulnerable situations, such as those in poverty or deprived of their liberty, who do not have adequate technology, such as devices and access to the internet, to benefit from e-learning. Also, teaching at a distance can make it difficult for teachers to monitor children's levels of engagement and to identify children who may be at risk of dropping out. So not all platforms used for e-learning offer the same levels of security and protection, including in relation to children's data protection and privacy. There has also been rampant domestic abuse within households, which affect children's ability to learn and focus at this difficult time. According to UNICEF, 3/4 of young children ages 2 to 4, for example, experience either psychological aggression or physical punishment, or both, by their caregivers. There's also significant exposure to violence, especially at an early age, which can impair children's mental development and is also linked to lower educational achievement and higher rates of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. Another significant challenge posed by COVID-19, which impacts on children's rights, has been the sexual exploitation and physical abuse of children, including issues such as cyberbullying and grooming for sexual offenses through the internet. And this, of course, was also to some extent brought about by school closures. Now, the other issue that I think is worth noting is that the lack of vaccination for children under 12 has also posed challenges in a number of different ways, such as access to safe zones and diminished attendance at restaurants. A massive debate has thus ensued between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, with uncertainty as to who is spreading the virus and who has more rights. Challenges posed to children by the loss of their childhood and ability to socialize with each other. For example, the inability to even walk to school together as before, to fraternize with their peers, with whom they can share some of these challenges, has been significantly impaired. In fact, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child recently released a statement and recommendations emphasizing the importance of social and recreational impact of the pandemic on the rights of the child while balancing health and safety considerations. So I'll move on now to looking at the lessons learned from what we in the Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean and elsewhere have been experiencing. Thank you very much, Dr. McCree. The lessons learned really are encapsulated in some of these points here. The need for new legislation, giving a voice to children and children's groups and parental concerns, support mechanisms and increased resources for reporting child abuse. And my suggestion is that the real safe zones should be to protect children and not only business interests, as well as the vaccinated, and greater ability of an access to technology for the bottom 40% of children who are failing the educational system. In terms of what progressive measures can be introduced, there are a number of recommendations here. One is which is to mandate risk, vulnerability, and impact assessments using as points of reference the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Constitution. This also means framing problem definitions, interventions with due concern for children's human rights. Secondly, making economic investments in child-sensitive testing and contact tracing. And thirdly, educating jurists with children's rights competence in all expert groups to mainstream children's rights perspective. And then finally, including assessments of short, medium, and long-term consequences of interventions for children. So some of the important conclusions that one can also draw from this is the significant need to protect children's personal data online. And this in particular has been a significant issue, which I don't think has been fully appreciated here and elsewhere. So the pandemic has demonstrated the importance of adopting a broad understanding of exclusion from school. We have the issue of social exclusion by not being able to interact with peers, but also the level of isolation that has occurred, which has also exposed children and made them more vulnerable, even through the use of online technology and inadequate support for special educational needs. The pandemic has also led to a rethink in the ethics of research with children and young people. With childhood research, a key issue has been ensuring that children's personal data is protected online. And this was in fact recently picked up by the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which commented that states should ensure that the rights of children to privacy, freedom of thought and opinion will be protected when utilizing the digital environment. And that children, and I emphasize children, will participate in the process of putting together legislative, administrative, and other measures to achieve this objective. I thank you very much.
I thank you, Justice Gafoor, for providing a legal and international context in which to locate the present challenges faced by children in the context of COVID-19, as well as specifying certain intervention strategies to help deal with this ongoing challenge. I thank you. I now would like to introduce Ms. Carleen Haynes to make a presentation. Ms. Hayes, is Principal of Caratal Sacred at RC School and is currently president of the National Primary School Principals Association. She has an MSc as well as a BSc in education from the University of the West Indies. I would like to now invite Ms. Hayes to make her presentation. Ms. Hayes, you have 10 minutes.
Dr. St. Bernard and Dr. McCree, fellow panelists, good morning. I am just going to share my presentation. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in schools being closed for physical classes globally. As a result, education has changed dramatically, with the distinct rise of e-learning, whereby teaching is undertaken remotely on digital platforms. This sudden shift for physical classrooms in many parts of the world have raised questions like, will the adoption of online learning continue to happen post-COVID-19 pandemic? And how has this shift impacted on the worldwide education market? Let's look at our nation. On Friday, the 13th of March, 2021, our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley, announced that all our schools in Trinidad and Tobago will be closed due to the COVID-19 virus. This was done to avoid widespread transmission of the COVID-19 virus in our schools. In the primary schools, teachers and students were not able to attend physically, and therefore our school was thrown into the virtual world. Our primary schools were definitely not prepared for this drastic change. The students in our primary schools would have primarily used their devices, whether it be a tablet, a mobile phone, or a laptop, for playing games and communicating with friends. Therefore, students never used these devices to access online teaching. So a change in their mindset had to happen. Our teachers as well would have also had to undergo many changes, such as using digital platforms, Zoom, Google Classroom, Classkick, and others. This was to aid in the teaching learning process. The first challenge all our administrators or principals faced in primary schools was the issue of devices and internet connectivity for our students. Principals had to collect data about this and provide to the Ministry of Education. Data collection about devices proved to be very challenging at times, since some students in the initial stages of the pandemic used their cell phones and their parents' cell phones or their shared devices with their other siblings in the home. Therefore, the data kept changing constantly. Fazia Munir wrote an article. He is from the Faculty of Humanities in the Nelson Mandela University in South Africa. And he wrote a very interesting article, Mitigating COVID, the Impact of COVID-19 Lockdown and School Closure on Children's Well-Being. And he did this article in October 2021. Munir states that there are three main areas of impact: mental impact, physical impact, and the impact on education. In March 2021, our principals would have experienced anxiety because we were experiencing the unknown COVID-19 virus. Some principals would have been afraid to even visit their school compounds initially, as our nation took the advice from the Ministry of Health about the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. The anxiety associated with the COVID-19 virus were questions raised in their minds, such as, will we get the virus if we interact with persons on the school compound? How can it affect the principal when they have comorbidities? Will it come to them? Will they be able to understand what's happening, as well as can they protect their own families from this virus? Then SCA students 2020 had to return to the school compound in July. And the anxiety started again in our principals. Where can I use as an area for quarantine? How to treat the COVID-19 cases and outbreak on the school compound? Many questions, as you know, many couldn't answer. Physical impact of COVID-19 can be seen in some of the homes of our students, since there are no school meals provided during this closure. In April and May of 2020, the Ministry of Education requested data from principals about students who received school meals. This was in their bid to assist families as the first lockdown happened in our nation. And many of our parents were unemployed and had no income. The Ministry of Education, in collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, started the initiative of providing food cards to these families identified. However, this did not have the rollout as expected, since some families never received this assistance and blamed our principals for this. But we had provided the data to the Ministry of Education. We also have undesirable behavior taking place at home by our students. And this is of a great concern to the principals and teachers in our primary schools. And referrals are done and sent to the Student Support Services Division. There are also changes in behavior by adults in the household. One major factor being due to the lack of income and also adults having limited movement and they had to stay home, it contributed to an increase in abuse in some of our homes. Again, in these cases, the principal can only complete referrals and send it to the Student Support Services Division. The COVID-19 lockdown has had serious impacts on the family environment, and some families have been unable to allow their children to participate in online learning. The impact on education, which will be my major factor. The digital divide, lack of devices and connectivity. And this proved very, very crucial for our students as well as our teachers. If our students could not be reached, we could not teach them. And it also brought forward the inequality and social justice within the system. Curriculum delivery and loss of learning, that as well affected our education system. We had gender issues, students learning in terms of male versus female students, and then interacting with technology. The role and responsibilities of principals, teachers, parents, students, and the Ministry of Education support staff during this online learning environment. We had to monitor. Thank you, sir. We had to monitor and we had to understand about our curriculum delivery process, data collection. What have we learned? We have learned that, according to Edwards, we have learned that children from marginalized communities are unable to make use of distance learning initiatives because they lack the resources needed for the implementation of the resources. This is the ecosystem for learning. As you can see, social supports are needed. Learning environments must be established and policy and other things must happen. So the changes in school due to COVID-19. the new normal. Wash your hands, wear your mask, and practice social distancing. So our recommendations: close the digital divide. Close the digital divide. So schools may reopen only to close again for periods in 2022. But we are going to be looking at rotation systems being done in our primary schools. So not all children can come out because there is not enough adequate space at our primary schools. Technology training for all. We need to continue online support services. We need to continue technology support for our teachers, our parents, and our students. We also need to emphasize authentic assessments must be done. We must ensure that we have support for social and emotional learning. We need to also establish stronger home-school relationships. Funding is needed. Funding is needed. And education recovery must be crucially examined. The UN agencies have described educators as the principal factors of global education recovery efforts and are key in accelerating progress towards inclusive and equitable quality education for every learner in every circumstance. School personnel must be able to use technology creatively to provide socioeconomic support to their students and reaching those most falling at risk and falling behind. Therefore, the UN recognizes that the heart of the educational response to the COVID-19 crisis is our educators. Munir closes with his conclusion, and I want to reiterate it. With the school closure, learning and teaching have shifted online. This move has worsened the existing inequities and inequalities between the advantaged and disadvantaged, and has threatened the future of our children. Thank you, Dr. McCree. I think my time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes, for a presentation that, in a sense, complements that of Justice Gafoor by looking more specifically at the various mental, emotional, physical impacts of COVID-19 on our children, as well as the digital divide that, in a sense, undermines their right to education and their right to a quality education. So thanks for giving us that, that perspective, particularly from where you are seated and at the primary school level. I would like now to introduce our next speaker. I just have to make sure that he's here. Father Gregory Augustine. Father Gregory Augustine.
Yes, good morning.
Welcome, welcome, Father. Father Gregory Augustine.
My late arrival.
Yeah, no problem. You're on time. You timed it well. Father Gregory Augustine is the principal of Fatima College since 2009. He has been a teacher for the past 30 years, specializing in history and religion. Father Augustine is also the provincial. He's also the provincial of the Holy Ghost Fathers for the last 10 years. I hope you got that one right. I want to invite you, Father Augustine, to make your presentation. You have 10 minutes to do so, and I will be giving you a 2-minute warning.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this, this conversation and the discussion. I will share a bit about what we have done here at Fatima and place that in the broader context of where I see education, the education system in Trinidad and Tobago is at the present vis-a-vis the pandemic. I want to start by saying that we are quite fortunate here at Fatima College in that we have a very high vaccination rate of students and teachers. It's somewhere in the vicinity of 97%. So when we were given the mandate to reopen physically, we had 97% student attendance. That has helped tremendously in the attendance. Now, unlike most other schools, we are not running a cycle. So most schools are doing cycles in terms of Form 4 will be out in 1 week and a Form 5 the other week and so on. All our students are out. So we are talking about over 400 students every given day being on the compound. It has served us well. And as one medical practitioner said, that in a sense we are the microcosm of what they talk about, the herd immunity. So I as the weeks went by, this is the end of the 9th week. And when I say 9th week, I'm talking about 9th week in the physical space. It's a 50-week term, but this is the 9th week in the physical space. And it has gone quite well, not without its trials and tensions, but again, in spite of that, things have gone quite smoothly. My concern is that our experience is really not that of others. And if I'm to mention, we are on Micrapo Road in St. James. We have two neighbors, Micrapo East and Micrapo West, opposite. Their vaccination rate is much lower, and therefore they would have greater challenges. And that is where my concern as an educator is, that in the broader scheme of things, this pandemic has affected us tremendously. I hear a number of people saying that we will see the effects and the fallout of this 10 years down the road. Well, I don't think we have to wait that long. We are already feeling the effects of it as we speak. The longer this goes on, it would be the greater the challenge in terms of providing education for our students. I will let me mention that we are all aware that juniors, that is forms 1, 2, and 3, are not in the physical space. Our experience has been that, and is, that these students are tired of the virtual learning. They want to come back into the physical space. So there is great anticipation as to what would be the decision of the Ministry of Education come next month, January, the new calendar year, the second term of the academic year. So there is great anticipation that juniors will be able to return. I am not certain. I have my concerns, my doubts, because if the vast majority of schools have not been able to accommodate and have a full attendance in this last term, what are the prospects for the juniors returning into that very physical space? You can't have 6 forms rotating in the course of a term. Where will that go? So that is a grave concern. And we're not speaking here about, I'm speaking about students who have the opportunity of devices and so on, connectivity. We're not speaking about those who don't. So even when you have the opportunity, the interest and the commitment is not there, or has waned, because we are in this system, in this situation for close to 2 years. And therefore the isolation, the alienation that students are feeling is beginning to take its toll, has begun to take its toll. We have decided as an institution to be very mindful of what we are seeing, the lack of engagement, as I said, the waning enthusiasm, because I'm sitting in my room by myself, following my classes. They do attend class, but the kinds of engagements that you will have in the physical space, it is not possible online. We are thankful for this these platforms and so on, they have allowed us to carry on education, but really there are serious drawbacks, and we have to be very mindful of this. So the answer that I see, I mean, I'm not a politician, I can't be a politician, is that possibly the only way forward will be mandatory vaccination to ensure that we have the opportunity to return to the physical space. Because, as I said before, the longer we go on with this, is the more is the greater we see the fallout of students throughout the country. And I'm not speaking only for my school. I'm quite aware, having contact with educators throughout the country, that you have this situation where students are just not at school. So that is of great concern. So if we have the mandatory vaccination, then we can say, look, we can move out with a certain degree of confidence. Part of the fear of an administrator is that you do not want to have any kind of, and I don't want to say outbreak, but any case, any 2 cases in a school is cause for concern. So there is that ongoing concern that we have to follow the protocols, and we do. But the minute anything goes awry, you then have a situation where people are fearful to return to the physical space and so on. So that kind of up and down, we are out, we're not out this week because we have to sanitize and so on, can be quite disruptive to the system. Having said all that, I think that teachers have done quite well. Yes, we hear a lot about the negatives and so on, but I can say from my experience and from sharing with other educators, in particular in the Port of Spain and environs area, teachers have gone above and beyond to ensure that their students are catered for. So
2 more minutes.
We can say that we are proud of what has been achieved. But the real answer has to be the return to the physical space. Education is not only about, and of course, what you have to be also mindful of is that we have not had any co-curricular activities. There's no physical activity at all, even with the return of the senior school. People may have seen, I think the second day of the physical return, our boys were on our playing field playing on the basketball court, and a reporter took a photograph and it was placed on the front page of one of the dailies. The ministry promptly called me to say, well, sports are not allowed. Now, that's a major part of education. So you have the students out, but they're not allowed to play. So how long can this go on? That young people simply come to school to do their academic work and that's it. Nothing else. So a major component of education is missing. What does that say for their future? Tertiary education is demanding more and more that persons applying for university must show their ability to be part of groups and organizations and so on. So they're not only looking at your results, your certificate, they're looking to see how are you engaging in life in general. And that is a major part of any modern school. Our students they are mandated to belong to some co-curricular activity, at least one. All of these activities are now just at a standstill. Nothing has been able to really take place. So hoping that in the new year, we will see moves to bring those youngsters out. We will see moves to involve them in more than simply just the academics, because 2 years in a child's life is a major part of their life. I mean, for us, we know that it's been 2 years, but it seems like 10. Okay. So thank you. Thanks for having me, and I'm very grateful to give the perspective of the secondary school educator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Augustine, for raising a matter that has had and continues to have serious legal, political, educational, and economic consequences within the education system and outside of the education system, locally and globally. And thanks for putting it on the table and speaking to our particular local context as it relates to the differential reaction, the differential rates of vaccination within the education system, particularly at the secondary school level. I assume that in the discussions that we may have particular questions concerning this burning issue of vaccination, which has become very much politicized across the world. I thank you again, Father Augustine, for putting that issue on the table this morning. I would now like to invite Professor Gerard Hutchinson to make his presentation. Professor Hutchinson is currently the professor and unit lead in psychiatry at the School of Medicine at the Faculty of Medical Sciences at Mount Hope. He also serves as coordinator of the postgraduate training program in psychiatry at the St. Augustine campus, and is the university examiner in psychiatry for the 4 campuses of the UWI. As a researcher, he has authored or co-authored over 130 peer-reviewed academic publications, and his work has over 9,000 citations, making him the envy of many. I would now like to invite Professor Hutchinson to make his presentation. Professor, you have 10 minutes, and I give you a 2-minute warning to wrap up. Professor Hutchinson.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you, Dr. McCree, and thank you, Dr. St. Bernard, for the invitation. And good morning to all the other panelists and your audience, or our audience. So my talk this morning is related to the pandemic, but really my perspective is to establish the reality that the pandemic, in my opinion, has just and contributes to really an amplification or exaggeration of the many defects and issues that are already there in the society that become more pressing because of it. And one of those is the issue of education and the relationship between education and health. And UNESCO has pointed out that for people to be healthy, they need to be educated. And children, adolescents need to learn. So for them to learn, they have to be well-nourished and healthy. And this relationship between education and health describes what I see referred to as a circular causal system. And the significance of that is that 75% of mental disorders begin by the age of 24 years. And 25% of individuals who are between 13 and 24 years of age will have a mental disorder at some point. So it means that that period, childhood to adolescence, is a very significant period in terms of mental health and by extension, general health. And this describes what is known as a circular causal system, where the actions in one system, in fact, impact on another, and that impact then feeds back to the first system, and they continue in this ever ongoing loop. And I think that the pandemic, as it relates to education, as already being discussed by the previous panelists, and its impact on health and mental health in particular, will reflect this. And just to substantiate that, mother's education has been shown to be inversely associated with children's mental health. In other words, the better mother is educated, the less likely her child will have mental health problems. Higher educational attainment in women, of course, is also associated with decreased childbirth. And that sets up another set of relationships. And what we found here in Trinidad is that 25% of mothers giving birth to children in public hospitals have significant depressive symptoms to be diagnosed as having postpartum depression. So it means that from the outset, we see that the children born to these mothers are going to be at somewhat of a disadvantage because of the mother's condition. We also know from our work that up to about 45% of women involved in intimate relationships are victims of some kind of aggression or violence. And again, in the context of raising children, that becomes very important. Children of mothers with severe mental illness are at increased risk for substandard academic performance at age 12 years. And this disadvantage extends into secondary school. And poor spelling skills, interestingly, are a predictor of these problems for these children in adolescence. So here we have that relationship, the mother having problems leading to the child having problems, and then leading the child having problems in education. UNICEF, in a report on children in the Eastern Caribbean, said that 23% of the 13 to 15 age group reported suicidal ideation. 14% had engaged in self-harm or attempted suicide in the previous year. And the fertility rate of the 15 to 19 age group was 31 per 1,000 girls, which is 3 per 100. So you see that if you use self-harm and suicidal behavior as a proxy measure of distress, there's already significant distress in that age group. And we found it here too. And this is in UWI students now. One of my students did a study some years ago, and in I'll leave the faculty unnamed. She interviewed 174 students and found that 31% of them had a history of self-harm behavior. 22% had done it more than once, but less than 10 times in the previous year. And a quarter of them had a history of childhood sexual abuse. So this is in a population that is supposed to be among our best. So you can imagine the impact that this could be having in populations that are not doing so well academically. And we know as well that there has been a shift in the age distribution of suicide. And here we have the 4 countries in the region with the highest suicide rates. And you see that the numbers are skewed, but on the far left, in Ghana, Suriname, and Trinidad, between 40 and 50% of the victims who die by suicide are between that 15 to 34 age range. And to kind of spread it more internationally, in Finland, they did and of course, the Scandinavian countries are very good with regard to having data and measuring data from childhood to death. And they looked at risk factors for mental illness, depression, more specifically in their population. And they found having a young mother, parental divorce, death of a parent, parental mental illness, family receiving social assistance, or being at the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, short education in parents, and here we have that reciprocal relationship again, interrupted education in the cohort, prenatal smoking and perinatal problems, and that's the relationship to the postpartum depression that I mentioned. And another problem that we face, community exposure to violence. A systematic review found that violence exposure in children was associated with poorer school functioning on every level, both academic and social, but also in terms of interpersonal relating. And it's also positively associated with mental health problems, anxiety, depression, aggression, and substance use. And again, interestingly, associated with cognitive and learning problems. And I picked out ADHD because of some figures we have about it. Children with ADHD are more likely to have, ADHD refers to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, are more likely to have violence exposure in the community. And not only violence, there are problems with physical health. A report from CARFA was saying that 7 to 12% of preschool age children in the region are overweight or obese, and up to 14% of adolescents are obese. And again, circular causal system, the Caribbean has the highest rate of NCD-related mortality of any region in the Americas, with heart disease and diabetes responsible for the greatest number of premature deaths in the region. And the importance of that, and is one of the reasons the COVID pandemic has hit us so hard, is the level of comorbidities, as the repeated reports identify. The level of comorbidities are so high in the country that when people get infected with COVID, the likelihood that they will have a negative outcome is much greater.
2 more minutes, Professor.
So these are the consequences of the NCDs, and I talked about the COVID issue. So in this study, they found that 26% of the children at St. Jude's had ADHD compared to 7% in the secondary school. And then a study we did in prison found that the mean IQ was 72, which suggests that people had borderline intellectual functioning in prison. And this underlines this low academic achievement as a predictor of delinquency. And all of this culminates, if you want to look for the impact now on our SEA results. In 2019 in Tobago, 13% got less than 30. The national average was 13.7%. In 20%, in 2020, 37% got less than 50. And look at the mean scores in math and English language. And then in 2021, that number of children who got under 30% increased to 17.7%, which is 1 in 6. So we're talking about a serious crisis if 1 in 6 of our children are scoring under 30 in the SEA, notwithstanding the issues with the SEA as an assessment of children at that age. And we know that the issues with the primary school system and the inequalities, I think all the speakers so far have referred to it in one way or another. And I would argue that that is the essential problem, that until we address these profound inequities in the system, our likelihood of dealing either with the pandemic or with the consequences in education and health will be severely compromised and likely not to bear fruit. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hutchinson. In her presentation, Ms. Hayes had spoken to the challenges being faced in collecting data to deal with some of the problems being encountered in the education system at her level. And in that context, must thank Professor Hutchinson for sharing with us some of the data at both an international level and a local level, at the level of the university and the primary school level, as it relates to the impact of mental health on educational performance, on other particular types of behavior, violence, and for making the fundamental point that the pandemic has exacerbated certain fundamental challenges, certain fundamental inequalities that predated its emergence, and that has really made it even more challenging to now deal with the fallout from this this terrible virus. So I thank him for sharing data that allows us to put things in a perspective based on empirical evidence. I would now like to invite our next panelist, our colleague, Dr. Indira Ramprasad. Dr. Ramprasad holds a BA in Language and Literature. She has a postgraduate diploma in International Relations, as well as a certificate in Translation from Spanish to English. She has a MPhil in Latin American Literature, as well as an MPhil in IR, and also a PhD in political science, this from the University of Florida. She also has obtained an LLB from the University of London. I now invite Dr. Rampersad to make her presentation and to remind her that she has 10 minutes and she gets a 2-minute warning to wrap up. Dr. Rampersad, over to you.
Okay, can you see me and hear me and see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, just needed to make sure of that. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, all my SALISES family, my UE family who may be here, members of the public, members of the audience. I want to thank sincerely our acting director, Dr. St. Bernard, for this opportunity. And also Dr. McCree. I think you're doing an excellent job as our chair this morning. But I don't want to waste my 10 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you today on this topic of COVID-19 and tertiary education, the educator's perspective. And it has been a very interesting experience for me, having been a secondary school teacher for some 15 years and a university lecturer for about the same time. Extremely interesting, and looking on at what is happening in the primary and secondary school sector and comparing it with what is happening in the tertiary sector. But I'm not here to do that comparison. I'm here to really give you a perspective on the tertiary education system and what transpired. I'm going to give some personal experiences in both my capacity as a lecturer at UE. My substantive post is a lecturer at the Department of Political Science. I'm now temporarily a senior research fellow at SALISES. But also in my capacity as president of the West Indian Group of University Teachers, WIGUT. And as you sit in WIGUT, you get some insights you don't usually get as a lecturer because of your interaction and engagement with management and administration. So I would go first into this issue of teaching and learning, then I would look at industrial relations, look at university closures very briefly, and work-life balance. So speaking on teaching and learning, I have to say it has been a phenomenal experience with both pros and cons. When I first started my first lecture, my students would log on with names like Devan Maraj, Terence Diausing, Kamala Prasad Bisesa, Keith Rowley, and you know, using the politicians' names and thinking that it was very funny. These are tertiary education students. We had to make it clear to them that they have to log on with their name because we know who were doing it, because they have to use their UEID to get into the Zoom system. So it was seen as funny, I think, initially, until the anxiety started to set in. And the anxiety set in, not just for the students, but for the educators as well, because we realized that we had to actually reorient our entire curriculum in some cases. We had to reorient our modus operandi and our mode of delivering lectures. The digital divide came into play with students without devices. Some students would tell me they were, you know, under a tree, or they were by the neighbor picking up Wi-Fi, or they were in a mall or somewhere, not in a mall, but close by some public space where they can get our Wi-Fi. I think that gap was somewhat closed at UE with the vision of our Vice Chancellor. We're lucky we have a very visionary Vice Chancellor in Sir Hilary Beckles, managed to engage the private sector in the various territories, in the various campus territories, to get tablets and laptops, and the university itself had a laptop borrowing and lending drive for our students. So we were able to close the gap to some extent, not fully, but I don't think it would have been as bad as it was in the primary and secondary school sector. Besides, many of our UE students already are using these digital equipment, but it doesn't mean that all of them had the capacity. You see, to carry these Zoom and to carry these Blackboard Collaborate and Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and all these platforms with video and audio requires a higher system. So the students, some of them were put into expense, some of them had it who could afford it, and some of them had to get borrowed. But as educators, we had to learn all these platforms, to teach through these platforms. So we may have been familiar with some of them, but not delivering a lecture, which is a totally different thing. And we also had to reorient our manner of teaching to accommodate now an online platform, so that we found that our workload increased exponentially because we had to constantly deal with emails from students, and we constantly had to put up messages on these platforms to reach our students, because there were no other ways to reach them but through these platforms. And we have a system called My Learning in UE, which works very well, through which we can transmit messages. So again, we have that advantage, like I say, which the secondary and primary schools do not enjoy. So curriculum realignment was one of the challenges that we face and still do, because we're learning every day on how best to educate our students. Another issue that came up, and it's one that faced me as president of WIGOT, is the issue of recordings. And the students were demanding recordings, and administration was also demanding it. But the lecturers were protesting. Some of them didn't have a problem. Some were protesting because there were implications for intellectual property rights. And what do I mean by that? Is that interaction between the student and the lecturer, and what is said there, it should be private. It's covered by privacy, data protection. Because you give a joke, but you don't mean to go out there. Political science, we make jokes of politicians and Donald Trump, whoever, and different types of jokes we make. Or we might have information that we don't want to be put out there that's sensitive. And so the issue of recordings and intellectual property rights became one that WIGOT had to deal with. It's not yet settled because we're now formulating an intellectual property policy. The issue of examinations came with tremendous challenges, because now you should see how these educators at UE were innovative. If it was a time for innovation, these examinations proved it. And it was challenging for both coursework and final exams. Challenging because now we had to deal with more issues of plagiarism and allegations of perceptions of cheating. So we were racking our brains on how to give a multiple choice exam without cheating. How do we ensure that the students are not there sitting with family members, friends, relatives, and doing exams? How do we ensure that an assignment is submitted by a student, or was done by a student and submitted by the student himself or herself? And these are challenges we still face, because we cannot establish that 100% for sure, because we don't have the technology in place for that yet. So they're working from home, they're studying from home, they're doing online lectures, but they're also writing exams online, the bulk of them. So we don't have a policy in place for the examinations to be done at UE yet. And with Omicron now, aboard, Delta being the number one of the most pervasive causes of death and transmission in the country, we don't see opening up in the horizon soon. We also are facing student absenteeism and apathy. And I say absenteeism because I might have 150 students in a class and I would see 80 participants when I check. And we take the rule that way by checking the participants list. But apathy, so you call on a student to answer, and we ask them not to use their cameras a lot of time because of bandwidth. You have 150 students, 200 students, bandwidth becomes a problem with cameras on. But you don't get a response. So you don't know if the student is there. You don't know if the student is listening. You might see them there, but you don't know if they're listening. You don't know if they're paying attention. You don't know if they're watching TV. You don't know if they're cooking, or you don't know if they're playing video games or what. You don't know. So we had that situation, but the bulk of them were very attentive. The bulk of them were participating, but we had that amount that were absent or apathetic.
2 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. And then for research and publication, we also had this issue of many of us who couldn't travel. We do have some travel grants for research, undertaking research and publication. We couldn't travel to do that research. Members couldn't go visit their families in December because of the lockdown in Trinidad in 2020. So we had issues of research and publication suffering, but the promotion system didn't change. So the criteria for promotion remained and was as rigorous as ever. And members were complaining that they think they were being unfairly treated. The Industrial Relations issue, to quickly summarize them, members, some complained the terms of conditions of employment were changed because they had to now work from home. We were granted some modifications of the uses of those travel grants to buy equipment and whatnot, but members, some of them still don't have a designated office space. They have to work with television on, husbands around, relatives around, children screaming, and you know it. The leave issue, some people were asking for pandemic leave, and which is not on board. It's not nowhere in the Industrial Relations Act, and the government did not take a position on that. The salary stagnation has remained one for all members of UE throughout, and there was a threat to staff benefits where even administration came asking for some of those benefits. Cost-cutting measures were enacted with the TAs, the teaching assistants and research assistants being cut, instructors being cut, and university embarked on cost-cutting measures. There was a general unavailability of some resources like that in particular. And we also witnessed minimal but reduced enrollment and competition now for online classes with all those universities globally. And now we have to deal with the contention issue of vaccine, and the union working out something. Hopefully we can work out some arrangement for COVID-19 vaccination policy. We have also seen a number of very old universities closing down around the world and in the United States, and I've chosen 4 of the oldest here for you to see the age of these universities, and they closed down in 2020. But what I think we've learned from this, I always like to end on a positive note, is that the educators have now developed innovative methods of teaching and learning and examination. We have the comfort of working from home, and if I may jest a bit, some people say, you know, well, I don't even have to shower, nobody knows. You don't have to face the long lines of traffic for those coming from far. We have higher attendance at the staff meetings via Zoom and at all UE meetings, because I attend many in my capacity as a WIGAT representative. And there is this push to innovation and entrepreneurship by UE, which is good. And we can, you know, now use this, necessity is the mother of invention. We can use this pandemic to our advantage. And the Vice Chancellor has launched a revenue revolution to make the university more financially viable. So that way we hope we can be more independent from state funding. And as we move forward, the university itself will become a more dynamic institution. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention.
I wish to thank Dr. Rampersad for using this platform to really raise and reveal some of the challenges we have had at the level of the university in dealing with some of the fallout from the COVID-19 virus, COVID-19 pandemic, as it had to do particularly with its impacts on our students and our staff. And one of the things that we also experience here, to complement what she was saying, is we also have a digital divide. I know that was referred to previously by a couple of speakers, but that has also been a challenge faced by both staff and students, but particularly by students. And the issue of online examinations and protocols surrounding online examinations that in some cases were compromised because of the problem with access to a reliable internet connection. And the university has been attempting to deal with that, among other things relating to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and how it has compromised the delivery of our service as educators to our clients, our students. So I thank her for sharing some of those experiences with the public at large through this platform. Thank you, Dr. Rampersad. I would now invite our final speaker, Dr. Olabisi Kuboni. Dr. Kuboni is a retired senior lecturer of the University of the West Indies. She has conducted training programs in various aspects of open, distance, and online learning, both within the UWI and across the English-speaking Caribbean. Her research interests include the analysis of online teaching, learning strategies, and the design and development of management systems to support online learning as an educational technologist. She holds the MA in Educational Technology from Concordia University, Montreal, and the PhD in Distance Education from the UK Open University. I now would like to invite Dr. Olabisi Kuboni to make her presentation. And I remind you, you have 10 minutes, and I will give you a 2-minute reminder or 2-minute warning to wrap up. Dr. Kuboni, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just get full screen here. Just 1 minute, wait for that. Okay, I will start and eventually be able to get full screen now. Okay, right. Good. Good day, everybody. Just one thing on the side, it was quite interesting to hear Dr. Rampersad say that Concordia University has closed down because that is where I got my first master's degree, interestingly enough. So much for the pandemic. All right, today I'm going to focus, like Dr. Rampersad, in the first part of her presentation. I'm going to look for my whole presentation on teaching and learning within the tertiary education sector and the issue of integrating technology into the teaching learning transaction. I am going to start with looking specifically at issues that arose during the lockdown and then transitioning as quickly as I can from there to make some suggestions about moving forward in terms of infusing technology into the teaching learning processes. Just to recap a few things which were mentioned before, but just to set the stage, set the context, this very much was an emergency situation that everybody was thrown into, didn't have any choice, classrooms had to close, and therefore everybody went online. So therefore there was a complete switch from face-to-face to remote teaching. That teaching more or less was patterned itself of the lecture type mode that was in the classroom. So it was top down most of the time, and the instruction was lockstep, meaning that everybody in the class had to move at the same pace, or supposedly had to move at the same pace, and doing more or less the same things. Everybody before mentioned the issue of the digital divide that came into focus. Even though there is, much emphasis on what was happening as far as that was concerned in the primary and secondary sector, I would think, even though I am not in the classroom now, but from anecdotal evidence and informal discussions with people, that it was also an issue at the tertiary level. And one would find that instead of having the advantage of having, a laptop, a lot of students may have been relying on their smartphones, which is not, very comfortable. After a while, we saw that there was limited reopening of physical spaces as infection rates declined. But this was limited, as I said, because by and large, as far as I was hearing, this was only for people having to do practicals, and probably also where there was need for one-on-one interaction between a tutor and a student, or for small group interaction. By and large, everybody remained at home. Now, some issues to be noted from that situation. As I said previously, lectures were in the primarily taking place, with this the primary mode of instructional delivery, and therefore, by extension, the full range of ICT tools were largely underutilized. To the extent that there were in-person sessions, these were deemed necessary for more learner-centered activity. So it is likely, from my point of view, that there were gaps both in content as well as in the manner of the transition from between remote teaching and the in-person sessions that took place. For example, one would want to ask, was there an adequate amount of support from the lectures to provide students with the kind of input that they needed to really participate in their labs or in their doing their research work and so on? Is it likely that there were gaps between these two modes of instructional delivery? More important though, I think, is the fact that it may have been that only a limited number of students came back on campus during those times when there were in-person sessions, because more people didn't have labs, they didn't have any workshops. So by and large, you found that maybe people in engineering, in natural sciences and so on would be the ones who got priority to come back to do these in-person sessions. Whereas if you were in humanities or social sciences, you didn't necessarily get that advantage. So moving from the lockdown mode and trying to pivot into looking forward, it seems to me that when one looks at integrating technology into the teaching learning processes and doing it at this time, that there may be a likelihood that one may be carrying over the emergency practices that had to be brought on from remote teaching, and trying to look ahead in a way that carries these remote teaching practices into the long term. And I am suggesting that one should be careful of doing that carryover, because the deficiencies that some of the previous speakers spoke about, students getting bored and so on, those kinds of problems may themselves carry over in terms of how we view integrating technology into the teaching learning transaction. So I am suggesting that there is need for a shift in an approach to a more differentiated approach to teaching and learning. Just to back up a little bit, to look at, because we're talking about the information and communication technologies, using the internet, it allows access to multiple information sources worldwide. It uses various multimedia formats. It facilitates communication among participants wherever they are. It accommodates the use of platforms specifically designed for teaching learning transactions, and those platforms allow a range of teaching, learning, and assessment strategies. They make possible synchronous and asynchronous interaction and allow for users, students, to create and share new knowledge. Now, when I look at the student that we are targeting, I want to think not only in terms of specific content areas, specific discipline areas, but what do we want for the education of the tertiary student as we look in terms of integrating ICTs. And I would want to suggest that these are some of the main things, regardless of content area, that we would want to look at. Both as they learn within their disciplines, but beyond their disciplines, and that they grow progressively, becoming more capable of taking responsibility for their learning. And so I'm suggesting a technology-infused model that has the learner as the most important person, that integrates technology with what the teacher does.
Two more minutes.
And both things, schools and teachers, would look at how they would deal with both subject matter content and teacher learning strategies. When we look at the technology and the teacher interface, I am suggesting that we could look at it along a continuum. In the early part, we could look at having more live interpersonal interaction and less technology interface, and that it grows incrementally to a point where you have all interpersonal interaction and use of technology tools taking place online. So we could start with looking at it mainly in a real world context, but gradually developing into a completely virtual world. These are some of the factors that I think that should influence where you decide to place your teaching learning transaction along that interface, along that continuum, learner factors, curriculum factors, technology factors itself, environmental factors. Some issues to be addressed as we develop this model of infusing technology, that we want to lessen the student dependency on the authority figure, that we want to build capacity among teaching staff, that changes institutional processes and procedures. I heard some of my previous colleagues talking about that, and that we make room for champions, people who are excited about this change and who would want to give a lot to making this happen. Just want to share with you two pieces of literature that you may find useful in looking at this integration of technology with teaching and learning. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Koboni. And sorry if I rushed you there in giving you your 2-minute warning. But thanks for a presentation that sought to focus more specifically on that challenge we have been having at the university and in the education system across the world, this interface with the new teaching and learning technology and the challenges that it continues to pose as we try to adjust. Some departments of the university, my department is one, have submitted us to a 6-week online teaching course as part of a capacity building process to prepare us for the online delivery of one of our programs that is really based out of Mona. So this adjustment continues to take place, but the issue of capacity building remains a critical one at several levels. Both the knowledge and both having the particular resources, computer resources, the particular platform, whether it is BBC, whether it is Zoom, all of these things are happening all at once. And we are part of that, global, the challenges faced globally to really incorporate the new technologies in a new normal for learning and knowledge production and knowledge consumption. So thanks for pointing us to some of the intricate and technical issues as it relates to curriculum, as it relates to pedagogy, and that sort of framework and issues that we are presently engaged in dealing with. So I thank you for your contribution, which complements that of the two previous speakers, Dr. Rampersad and Professor Hutchinson as well. So I want to, at this point, thank all the presenters for making presentations that have surely ignited some chat. And I would begin or approach the question in period by asking questions in batches of 3 or 4. I would also read comments from some of the participants, which you can respond to as you see fit. So I want to start with the first batch of questions. There might be a little delay sometimes because I'm reading these questions in real time, and sometimes I have to edit them for particular reasons, for clarity, for political correctiveness, so to speak. So let me begin with the first question that came in the chat that was directed to Justice Gafu. Does the right to education under international law apply to the right to education for migrant children in Trinidad and Tobago? Does the right to education under international law apply to the right to education for migrant children in Trinidad and Tobago? And that is from Florence Simongal. Thank you very much for that question. But let me, Justice, let me give it in batches of 3 or 4 questions, and so I will come back to you. Thanks. A question from Andrea Encinas. Not all parents are natural and patient teachers. Neither are they naturally tech savvy. Has there been any separate training for parents in both basic teaching skills and internet technology? I'm looking for the other question. For Fatima College, Makida Daisi, what steps have been taken to access the resources of learning design specialists to attend to online learning needs of the students? What steps have been taken to access the resources of learning design specialists to attend to online learning needs of the students? And lastly, what is the national vaccination rate for teachers? What is the national vaccination rate for teachers? So those are the first batch of questions. Justice Gafu, back to you. Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And just to thank Mr. Mangal for that question. So the question focuses really on the right to education for migrant children under international law. And I can start primarily by focusing on the major convention that is used very much to identify children's rights, which is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989. And that does not discriminate in any way in respect of migrant children or children from Trinidad and Tobago or elsewhere. The issue with all of these is that once an international convention has been implemented into domestic law, then it is enforceable through the courts of law here, and it is not by any means restricted to children who perhaps may be migrants or not migrants in any way. The only caveat is Article 4 of that convention, which recognizes that there may be limited resources which could justifiably limit the implementation of certain economic, social, and cultural rights set out in the convention. But the point is that once a system or processes or resources are put in place, then it must be available to all children, whether they're migrant children or not. Thank you. Any responses to some of the other questions? Has there been any separate training for parents in both basic teaching skills and internet technology? Asked by Andrea Encinas. Any takers? It's a very
Dr. McCree, that is like, has there been any training for politicians? So I think the answer is obvious. I mean, it is up to the individual to take those. It's private. So there's no, I don't think there's any public initiative with that respect. The government doesn't have that. So a lot of people learn it from trial and error through their own computers. Some people would have taken courses, but I don't know if they would have done that during the COVID-19 pandemic or before.
But there have been attempts to engage in parental education in certain quarters in
yes.
both the NGO sector, and I think in the state social policy. So that question might be relevant in the context of past initiatives to deal with the parental deficits that we face in the country. But I know it's a very challenging kind of question and task to carry out. Any other takers? Let me just remind you of the question. What steps have been taken? Father Augustine, I think this was directed to you in particular from Akida Daisi. What steps have been taken to access the resources of learning design specialists to attend to online learning needs of the students?
Well, it's a two-part answer. We, in terms of the online education, I have to say at our institution, we have done very well. And it is because of the socioeconomic group that we have. So the issue of access to devices and connectivity, we have not had that challenge at all. And we have been able to function quite efficiently for the entire period from April of 2020 to now. The outside of here, I mean, in other institutions, the challenge or the challenges have been many. And as we have said time and time again, there have been issues of connectivity, of lack of devices and so on, of students not attending. And institutions have done quite a good job at reaching out for help. And the society at large has done its part to assist. But having all that assistance, the fact that you have this remote learning for children and teenagers, that is a serious challenge. This can go on for so long and no more.
Dr. McCree, if I may add.
Yes.
So what I would add in terms of resources is not just devices. Okay, and especially educators working from home, you also need desks and furniture, but the students need learning materials. And I think our library at UWI done a phenomenal job in putting as much as possible online. And I say as possible, because while we have, we have a database called JSTOR, which would have all the journal articles, we have newspapers, and those are easy to access. The books are more difficult because you have to get copyright permission from the authors, and not all of them are online. We have a number of books online. They put a number of the textbooks online. So all the students are registered students of UWI. They have access to the library resources at leisure. And the Vice Chancellor has also set up a special division, a special project on digitization with a special coordinator to deal with that whole process of digitization, which would also encompass providing resources for students, to facilitate the students' teaching and learning process. And for us too, as educators, we use the library all the time. I pull along stuff remotely from home, from the library all the time to facilitate my teaching and research. As you would know, Dr. McCree will do that as well. So I think UWI is more fortunate in this respect, and this is what I keep saying. throughout that the primary and secondary school experience will be very different from the tertiary one, because UE was already advanced with digitization, with technology, with our students, but some of us were already teaching, online. While many of us had to learn, many of my members came and they had to take courses, and those courses were provided. We had Settle, we had SITS, the Teaching and Learning Center, the Computer Center. They all came and gave numerous training courses on how to teach and do examinations online. So I have to say that UE has an advantage, and having been in the secondary school system myself, I see the difference. I can make that comparison even before COVID. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hayes?
Yes.
You had your hands up, yes?
Yes, I had my hand up because I just to answer the question that the person asked about separate training for parents. Just to say that at the primary level, we would have done some level of training for parents, but it would have been on an individual school basis. Okay, so we principals and teachers, and with the assistance of student support services, we would have reached out to our parents and lend that extra support. I can't say if it has happened in all schools and all districts, but in the majority of the schools, that was what we did to ensure that our parents understood what was their purpose and their roles and responsibilities during this online learning environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. There's the question of the vaccination rate for teachers. I know that there, a couple months ago or 3 months ago, there was a bold attempt to get students vaccinated to prepare them for return to school, and that didn't turn out the way it was hoped. But the question is directed particularly to teachers. And I know Father Augustine did say that 96% of his students are vaccinated. Are you in a position to indicate the percentage of teachers that are vaccinated, either in your school or across the education system, secondary school?
I would say, well, at our school, it would be the same figure in terms of the teachers, but countrywide, the nationwide, I guess would be somewhere, it would be reflective of what we see in the nation at large. So I don't think teachers will be any different. So somewhere close to 50%.
Okay, thank you. And while you're on the floor, there's a question also directed to you from Makida Daisi. What positive outcomes and potential opportunities have been recognized as a result of the challenges posed for virtual learning in this context?
Well, Claire, okay, so CXC has a plan for the exams of CXC were to go online from May, June of 2020, last year. Of course, Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, being the biggest countries, said that we were not ready. What has happened is that the pandemic has pushed that forward. And in fact, I think we are far ahead now. So in terms of the exams, but the pandemic and the online learning has really opened up many opportunities for learning and interaction that we did not think were possible. So it's not all negative. And in fact, what has happened now is that there is no going back. So after this experience, when we do return all to the physical space, there will be a greater integration. And we are seeing that already with the fact that we have returned, half the school has returned. So there's a greater integration. Simple things like we were using the Google Classroom before, that continues. And work is being posted, exams are still continuing online and so on. So that it is not that we are going to put these things aside when we return to the physical space. It is there, we have integrated already, and that integration will continue. So that is certainly one positive that has come out of this experience, and it's a major positive.
Thank you, Father Augustine. A particular comment you made prompted this comment and question I'm going to read, but it's directed to all panelists. And this is from Karen Juliet Serret, who comments, but mandatory vaccination does not mean that the virus will not spread. So how do you align mandatory vaccination with the fact that those who are vaccinated could get and do spread the vaccination, and the fact that schools would still be closed for the sanitization process? Won't students still not miss school?
That's the elephant in the room, Dr. McCree. That is the elephant in the room. And it's the elephant in the country. It's the elephant in the country. You saw what happened at Queen's Park, Savannah, on what night. So this issue of vaccination is highly contentious. Everybody has rights. Vaccinated has rights, unvaccinated has rights. Vaccinated can spread and contract the virus. Unvaccinated can. They say unvaccinated, the risk of the unvaccinated doing it is higher. There are multiple sciences with regard to this, and not even a healthcare specialist can answer that question. I don't think I want to say that I can answer that question, because it is something that we also have to grapple with our members. I think we at UWI have a very high vaccinated rate for the staff. I can't speak for students. I have a colleague at a secondary school said 80% of her students from 4 to 6, which she has to attend to, are not vaccinated. So, there is this whole issue of rights, but with rights also come responsibilities, which I always tell the students. So we have rights and responsibilities, and we have a deadly pandemic. So I say more. Thank you.
Justice Gafu, can I ask your intervention here? Vaccination is not currently mandatory in this country. It's still left to the democratic process, of choice.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. McCree. I mean, this has been, as Dr. Rampersad suggested, a very contentious issue. It's interesting that quite recently, the Chamber of Commerce and I think other business interests have been calling for mandatory vaccination, but I think the government at this point in time has indicated that they're not so minded. I don't know whether, of course, given the spread of COVID and, of course, the variants that we are learning about may cause or induce a different perspective to be brought in mind. And I know there are many elements within the educational system that seem to favor some form of mandatory vaccination, but I think that people don't like to be forced to do things, whether or not it might imperil even issues of health and so on. So I think that one has to tread carefully. I think from a legal perspective, it is certainly possible to implement it. I believe others, on record as saying that, and there is in fact authority for that effect, but it would probably take a legislative measure. What has been taking place, of course, has been very much indirectly, whereby some businesses and other places of work have been, refusing access or denying access, or even putting people, not bringing them back into the system unless they have been vaccinated. So you have that indirect pressure, but in terms of mandatory vaccination, it would certainly, I believe, take a piece of legislation to implement that. Whether or not it's prudent and so on, well, I guess will depend very much on the policy issues and the decision of the government of the day.
Thank you, Justice. Ms. Hayes, from where you sit as a primary school principal, as president of the Parent Teachers Principals Association, how do you see this issue of mandatory vaccination, particularly since in the US, Pfizer has recently developed a vaccine for children? How does your association respond? Can you speak to that issue of mandatory vaccination? Is it necessary?
Well, our membership, we would have met and we spoke about it until the vaccine is sanctioned for 5 to 12. Having a school reopen physically for the smaller children is going to pose a challenge, because I have listened to my secondary school principal's counterpart about children and adhering to COVID-19 protocols. We have the smaller children, and they cannot understand to continue wearing a mask for the entire day, not hugging their friends, not hugging their teachers. So we will support mandatory vaccination when a vaccine is available, and then we can try to bring out the older children at our schools in primary school. But our issue will be space, because our primary schools are not built for that social distancing space that has to be done. So we would support mandatory vaccines when it is approved, and we will hope that our students will be vaccinated, because the spread of the disease is something of great concern to us. So we continue to look at the issues, but like I said before, we have the smaller children, and dealing with the smaller children is really going to be an issue to have them all out physically without vaccines, because they love to hug and they love to take off their mask, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes, for that response. Someone's hand was up. I may have missed it. You may speak now.
Yeah. Can I?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, this is a very contentious issue, and the issue of rights, I think one has to make a distinction between the rights of the individual and the rights of the whole community. And in a serious crisis situation like this, I think very strongly that the rights of the whole would supersede the rights of the individual. And somebody has to say that. I was very interested when Father Augustine was talking, and he gave a very graphic, situation where, in terms of students in forms 4 to 6 in his school, all the students are in the school every day, and he has some 90-something% vaccination rate for both students as well as the teachers. And then when he looks to the 2 schools opposite, Mukurapo East and Mukurapo West, that it is maybe almost the opposite. Now, I couldn't help thinking about, that there is a serious socio-economic divide between the population of Fatima College and the population of the 2 schools opposite to Fatima on Mukurapo Road. And where do we go from here if we want to enforce so-called individual rights for vaccination? Where do we go from here looking at an expansion of the gap between the population of Fatima College and the population of those 2 schools that are opposite, just right there in close proximity to one another? I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dr. Koboni. While you're on the floor in camera, there's a question here to you. How do we integrate practicums and internships in an attempt to align our curriculum with practice?
Yes, a very, very important question. I think that has to go, to the point of the overall design of the curriculum in the first place. So there may be a kind of a tendency to keep them separate. So we have so-called theoretical knowledge that is treated in one way, and practical knowledge that is treated in another way. And I think one needs to narrow that, that separation between what is so-called theoretical and what is so-called practical, so that one could find ways of building support for practical work, for the practicums within the learning of the theoretical. One has to find a way of bridging that gap between these two in order to minimize issues that may develop among some students in handling their practical. And I think it is from a curriculum design, even more so instructional design point of view, that is an important thing that should happen from the get-go in terms of making sure that there is no gap, you know, between what is so-called theoretical and what is so-called practical.
Thank you, Dr. Kaboni. Father Augustine, this is a question also directed to you from Dave Cassie. Can Fatima College then institute a rotation system to bring on the lower forms to break the monotony of online learning?
Well, we are directed by the Ministry of Education, so we are not allowed to have our to make our own decisions in terms of when students come out and when they don't. So we are awaiting word from the Ministry of Education as to what the plan is for January 2022.
Okay, thank you. And just shifting a bit, Professor Hutchinson, a question from Andrea Encinas. Can you please talk about the importance of learning through play from childhood to adulthood, the correlation between the lack of play in childhood and criminality, the effect that the environment, spatial, aesthetic, weather has on mental health? Professor Hutchinson?
Yes, hi.
Yeah, you got the question. It's in the
yes,
chat. Yes.
Yes, I did. So yeah, play therapy is an important component of the treatment arsenal in mental health for the child and adolescent age group, and it's now being incorporated into the treatment for the adult population as well. And that is directly derived from the impact of play as a mechanism to improve bonding, to improve socialization, and to develop symbolic and abstract thinking skills in children. So I think one of the issues of the pandemic and the lack of activity outside of the house is that the inability of children to play in the way that they would normally do and interact. And in the flip side of that is that what we've seen is a marked increase in their online gaming, which has its own set of challenges. Although within that community, there are lots of ways in which group activity and group relations are fostered, but it denies them the physical interaction. So I think, and of course, play is also related to the aesthetics, the spatial aesthetics, as Ms. Encinas mentioned. And the appreciation of the spatial aesthetics is an important part of development as well. And from conception, our environments play a role in how we develop who we are, how we relate to ourselves, as well as how we relate to the world. And it's something we tend to take for granted. But the spatial aesthetics, the capacity to engage with space in a mutually reinforcing way is an important part of health in general and mental health in particular.
Thank you, Professor Hutchinson. The issue of vaccination is getting a lot of traction on the chat. We don't have the benefit of a specialist in this area, but let me share with you some of the comments here. One comes from Alison Fong. Vaccine hesitancy is a regional and global challenge. I cannot understand why an option to minimize the severity of the impact should you contract COVID is a problem for individuals. I am ready to get my booster. And another question from Roger Watts: if vaccines are preventative, then in the middle of a pandemic where people test positive and get sick, where is the discussion on treatments? I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
Dr. McCree, I would just comment like this. And like I keep saying, it's highly contentious. I have to deal with it from the union perspective all the time. That is basically the medical perspective. But this issue is not just a medical one. Well, fortunately, unfortunately, it has religious, it has legal, it has social, political, psychological, ideological, because I see debates on the freedom of the individual, you know, the philosophical aspect of all of this. There's so many dimensions to it. And the whole issues of rights and the question of who writes Trump. So even legally, there are two cases right now, CariMed and Agro Investments Limited from Jamaica that are in the Jamaican court, High Court. Those companies wanted their workers to have mandatory vaccine. And the court itself is hesitant, like the vaccine hesitancy, the court is hesitant to rule. It brought constitutional motions. The workers claim that their constitutional rights were being trampled upon. And they brought constitutional motions. And the courts themselves are hesitant to rule on this in the region. So we don't have a precedent, a case in the Caribbean yet as to how this should go. So it will remain contentious. And when the court rules, it would serve as a precedent. And then I think we can see more concrete action being taken. Other than that, it's everybody's views, and depend on where you stand, you give your perspective. So the religious would give one, and the scientists would give another one, and the legalists would give another one. And so it would go and remain a contentious issue.
I guess in the context of that vacuum, people can choose to die or not. But I leave that there. I want to share with you a comment or a question posed by Shira Carrington to Dr. Koboni. Are there any strategies we can use to impact the national shift of the curriculum to include artificial intelligence and technological imperatives to develop authentic 21st century skills integration?
Yes, thanks, Chair. My position is, I know that artificial intelligence is very much on the table now. In terms of the general school population in Trinidad and Tobago, I would like to put the emphasis a little lower on the development of digital literacy skills, because we are not even there in a real way as yet. And by digital literacy skills, I'm not talking about, well, the normal in terms of computer skills, but also in terms of skills in accessing information, very key if you're going to be living in an online environment and working in an online environment, accessing information, analyzing and critiquing information, and using that information appropriately in various contexts. There is also the issue of communication, being aware of how you communicate and making the best use of communication for particular context. So there are those a broad suite of generic skills for living and working in an online environment that I don't think that we have really tapped into sufficiently. in our school population. And I would like to see that at that level, before we move on to AI, I would like to see that given more priority in terms of both secondary and definitely at the tertiary level, that it has its own space in terms of the curriculum.
There is a comment here from Marlene Francis. Again, it's on the issue of vaccination. Statistics show that the vaccine produces adverse effects. Why is this fact hidden and not highlighted, especially in the Caribbean?
Well, it's not entirely hidden because global information is out there. We heard about AstraZeneca and thrombosis, and 4 in a million can contract thrombosis from that. It's not exactly hidden from global sources, but why it may be hidden in the Caribbean is because there are legal implications, and there can be legal implications. So I think that was why. If I would give a brief answer.
On the question of legal implications, Justice Gafoor, what is the legal implication of mandatory vaccination for the rights of the child?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues here. One is, in particular, the fact that many of the international drug companies have sought indemnities from countries to whom or to which vaccines have been supplied. So the extent to which you may be able to seek or pursue legal action against them, I think would be somewhat constrained and limited. In fact, this has been the subject of severe criticism, particularly where developing countries have been highly dependent on perhaps these vaccines being sourced from some of the larger, more developed countries. But in terms of the broader implications, this is an issue, I think, which is still very much uncharted territory, so that it's difficult to say one way or the other. I think one issue that I think needs to be borne in mind, insofar as one might be tempted into the line of saying, the greatest good for the greatest number, is the issue of recognizing that, utilitarian arguments such as that, to some extent, always have to be weighed up against human rights of the individual. And as you suggest, I mean, people have a personal choice, but ultimately, I still think that until, as Dr. Rampersad says, we have a formal decision from a court, and in fact, there have been some suggestions emanating from the industrial court, for example, Trinidad and Tobago, that it may be very difficult to impose mandatory vaccination without tampering with the contractual rights of workers. This is a broad issue, which I think is very much, open for further consideration. And so, I mean, I wouldn't like to necessarily give a formal view on that. I think it's something that a court will have to formally rule on.
Thank you very, very much. Now, the questions have alternated between vaccination and the challenges of online learning and transitioning to online, delivery. So in that context, I want to share another question here posed by Makida Daisi. Considering play as a necessity to optimum cognitive and social development on all levels of education, what practical strategies are possible for distance and online learning? I don't know if Professor Hutchinson would want to take a stab at that one. Or anyone else? Father Augustine?
Repeat the question, please.
Considering play as necessity, or as a necessity to optimum cognitive and social development on all levels of education, what practical strategies are possible for distance and online learning? I guess in context or relationship to play.
As I said, it is play part of the crisis that we are facing is that there is no play. There is no okay. You have the online games and so on, but even that we are seeing that not only at our level but at all levels, that there is so much of that you can do and no more. So the actual physical activity. I just had someone in this morning whose son is involved in track, and all of that training has ground to a halt really in the last literally 2 years. So the youngster is reeling under the constraints that are placed on everybody.
Okay, thank you. Let me share with you again another question now that speaks to the technological challenges posed or exacerbated by online learning. And this is coming from a Delta Jesul. If the general conversation now is that this virus will be with us for a while yet, I think that too much time is spent on the issue of vaccination and not enough attention placed on understanding the changing times we are in and how do we embrace the new technologies of learning and learning it quickly to become part of our future existence. Is it that the adult teachers, professionals of today are hesitant in the new learning technologies and so are looking forward to the old system of teaching and learning?
If I could, just make 1 or 2 points there. First of all, I don't think, and I will just deal with this very briefly, I don't think that too much issue is being placed on vaccination. If we are to really move forward and put the education sector, regardless of what level, tertiary, primary, secondary, at any level, we have to face up to the issue of vaccination. And there has to be widespread vaccination. So that is where I stand with that. In terms of teachers learning about the technology, I think the issue of learning is, as far as integrating technology is concerned, will have to be an ongoing one. And so we have to clarify our policies in the first instance. What do we mean? What do we want to get out of integrating technology into the teaching learning transaction? And don't take it for granted that we have arrived there at a point where, we can work from where we are. I think that there is a need for us to, one, establish clearly articulated policies that everybody can recognize and hopefully buy into. And at the same time, see how those strategies can translate into everyday practice. So it is a whole institution, whole sector approach that is needed, and to see how you would use the technology at different phases of the education sector. And that to me is an ongoing exercise that everybody should be involved in.
Thank you. Father Augustine, Ms. Hayes, Dr. Rampersad, what say you? Teachers, lecturers, instructors, however you want to label them, are they longing for the good old days of face-to-face learning?
No.
Or are they responding to the challenge of adaptation and adjustment to the new modality?
I just plainly stated, teachers have adapted teachers are willing to embrace technology. Nobody is longing. I'm an old man in this, and I have adapted. I have adopted. I have transitioned. Many of my teachers, I would have taught them. This is a generation that is involved, and they know they've grown up in the technology. So nobody's longing for any past, you know? So I smile when I hear people say that teachers longing for some good old days. They don't know the good old days, okay? They know technology days. And therefore, they have embraced it. The reality is that in spite of this, there are constraints, and we have to admit that.
Okay, Dr. McCree, I totally concur with Father there. The university lecturers, you know, we were in classes with hundreds of lecturers taking training courses. We fully embraced it. Some of us were already familiar, some didn't know. We help each other. People were calling me, and I would go through, you know, on WhatsApp on my phone. They were, you know, we on the computer together, teaching each other, helping each other. So there was a willingness. That reluctance, I didn't see it amongst the tertiary UE cadre. However, in terms of face-to-face, I have to say, I believe Mona did a study, and the students want face-to-face, and we have to understand why too. These are young people, and this is a time of socialization. This is where they meet their future husbands and wives, so to speak. Relationships build, and you know, they're active, they're young, they're active, they're social beings. So the students, now I understand some primary school students were thrilled with the idea of not having to go to school. You know, friends would tell me about their own children, but I think that's probably worn out, and now the lack of socialization, they are feeling that, they're really feeling, I have nephews there, they're feeling the pinch to just be locked down home now. But the tertiary education students, I think they definitely want to go back. The UE brand itself is really a physical brand. It's the Caribbean. When we try to attract students from abroad, it's the Caribbean we are also selling. So there is that dimension of it as well. But I think there is a little gap and a difference between the teachers and the students in this respect. The teachers at UE, I think many of them, the lecturers, we are accustomed, we're now comfortable working from home. We're quite comfortable. Those who live far, because I have members from Grandy coming to UE and, you know, all Point Fortin, all different parts, and the students too. Those would be reluctant for face-to-face. Part-time students who have challenges, you know, busing it up here or taxiing it up or whatever to come to St. Augustine to take classes, they much prefer the online learning. So it's not a homogeneous group per se, but the bulk of the full-time students, I believe, would still prefer the face-to-face learning.
Okay, thank you. I've gotten a wrap-up signal. Ms. Hayes, how do you respond to this question? As teachers at the primary school ready or have already taken on the challenge of adjusting to 21st century teaching?
Okay, so yes, initially principals and teachers in an emergency mode. Now, yes, they have embraced the opportunity because we are online. When we try to bring our students out physically, we see what happens. So therefore, our educators in the primary school system, they have embraced the technology. They have learned, they have gone beyond the extra call of duty just to ensure that they start to understand all the different platforms. And as we continue to remain online, definitely we are going to continue to keep on. Like I agree with Father. It is an ongoing process, and we will continue to work because we are in the implementation stage. So yes, we have embraced it, and we are not looking at the old system anymore. We are looking at continuing to operate in the online environment.
Someone asked whether you have the necessary physical resources within the schools to facilitate that transition and that adaptation or adjustment.
Well, it always goes down to funding, and some of the issues we will have definitely would be furniture. But as of now, we work with what we have. We are trying our very best. The ministry has provided what they can, and we also engage stakeholders in assisting us. And when the time arrives and we have to do physical reopening, we will embrace all the opportunities that we have available to make it happen, because that's what we do as principals of primary schools. Thanks.
Okay, while you're on camera or on the floor, there's this final question from Lionel Remy to all panelists, but particularly from where you sit. How can we engage and support parents more effectively to increase their appreciation of the importance of vaccination, as well as responding to their own needs for improvement in parenting competencies to support child and adolescent development?
So as I had said earlier, all schools or most of our primary schools would have tried to engage our parents, and we have done a lot of workshops. There are a lot of parental support groups being developed in the primary school system, and student support services. They have had sessions with parents explaining to them, giving them that level of comfort as to what they need to do, who they could reach out to. We have also had workshops for parents in terms of if they, for some reason, suspect there are issues with their students at home and their children at home, as to some of the things that they can look out for to assist them in dealing with feelings. There are a lot of negative feelings taking place with our children, and therefore they are trying their very best to assist. So we have engaged stakeholders. We have continued to engage our parents, because parents are our major stakeholders in our school. So we look at it as a partnership between home and school as we continue in this online environment. So we also do, we have done sessions with parents explaining about the vaccines. And again, as we always say, it's not mandatory. We cannot force parents to take the vaccines, but we try to provide the information and they make their decisions and choices.
Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Any comment, Father Augustine?
The irony of this situation that we face now is that though we have been mandated to separate and to isolate, and it has brought even more communication and more interaction. And we would not have seen that if we didn't have this situation. So again, this is a positive that has come out of the situation, that parents, there's a far more interaction with parents and so on than we ever had before. And clearly this is going to continue.
Thank you, Father. I will now invite all presenters to make their closing statements, comments as we wrap up this session, this discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCree, and perhaps if I can go first. I think that the 2 points I want to emphasize. One is to ensure that adequate resources are devoted towards protecting children, particularly those who are very vulnerable through the use of the online platforms. And the second is something I had alluded to in my presentation, which is the importance of protecting the data of children that perhaps have to be entered when they're using the online platforms. I don't think we've given enough attention to this. This may require some legislative reform or change, but I do feel that this is something which is urgent insofar as we continue to use these platforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other closing comments? Indira, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yes. So 2 comments. One, a call on employers to be sensitive to the time of employees. Because we find ourselves in 12-hour meetings, we find ourselves on call at 9, 10 in the night, and meetings on Saturdays and Sundays because they think you're available because you're at home, and to the contrary. So they have to take cognizance of employees' time and private time and family time. That's one. And the second one, I want to commend all our educators out there. I want to heartily commend them. Those at UE, those outside of UE, those in this primary and secondary school system. We are doing a tremendous job in ensuring that our children get an education. So our goal is to get them graduated and get them graduated well. So I really want to make that call to congratulate our educators. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my closing comments, basically, we're just going to be looking at the education recovery of our students in the primary school system. And again, I just want to reiterate what Dr. Rampasad said. I want to compliment the principals and the teachers and the parents as we continue to educate our primary school children. We continue to work together as a team, and without having that strong bond and relationship between home and school, it cannot happen. So with the support of all our stakeholders in education, we will continue to try to ensure that our students learn and we reach all our students in the primary school system. So I thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to you, Dr. McCree, and the whole of SALISES. This was a very useful forum that you organized here. What I would like to say at the last is that as we continue in the education sector, and regardless of what level in the education sector, that we continue to think carefully about the integration between curriculum design, curriculum development, and how we infuse technology into the implementation of that curriculum. As I said previously, that is an ongoing, non-stop discussion, and I'm sure that it will grow as we proceed in this post-lockdown era. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Kuboni. Father Augustine, I think you have the last ball. I think we probably lost Father Augustine.
No.
Okay.
Just one comment. I think what we have realized out of this is that the technology has its place, but the tradition of that physical communication, really there is no substitute. We are thankful for the technology, and it has worked wonders in this crisis. But that physical is central to our existence.
Okay, thank you. I now want to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Bipaya Puri, to give a formal vote of thanks. Dr. Puri.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So what you just witnessed was our second forum on managing the national education system. And the discussion helped us to understand how the various levels of the education system are managing during the pandemic. And we also gained much food for thought regarding how we as a nation could and perhaps should chart forward to ensure children remain the center of the education system. And today's discussion, of course, would not have been possible without our panelists. So to Justice Anthony Gafur, Ms. Colleen Hayes, Father Gregory Augustine, Professor Jared Hutchinson, Dr. Indira Rampasad, and Dr. Olabisi Kuboni, it was delightful to hear your contributions, your very insightful contributions on this very important issue. And we would like to extend sincerest thanks to all of you for taking time off from your busy schedules to participate in today's event. So thank you once again. Secondly, to the audience, it's important to say that we highly value your continued support and participation. This is our third forum overall, and we are very happy about how well received they have been. And specifically for today, we thank you for adding to the richness of the discussion with your comments and questions. So thank you, audience. I would also like to extend sincerest thanks to the media houses who are present today. We are very grateful for your presence at our events, and we thank you for your engagement and constant support. Now, there are quite a number of people who are responsible for how smoothly the event ran today. And firstly, we are extremely grateful to UWI's Marketing and Communications Office for their continuous effort towards our events. I would particularly like to acknowledge the contribution of Ms. Josanne Green and Ms. Chanel Glasgow. Thank you both, and to the rest of the team for your contributions towards the proficient running of today's forum. And I would also like to extend heartfelt thanks to the campus IT services, specifically in the provision of technical assistance for today's event. Thank you, campus IT. Now, chairing and moderating an event of this nature is no easy job, and month after month, our chair continues to deliver on these tasks, and it was no different today. So a special thank you to Dr. Roy McCree for chairing today's event and courteously moderating the panel discussion. Thank you, Dr. McCree, good job as usual. I would also like to recognize the efforts of the administrative staff at the SALISES who have been diligently working behind the scenes. Ms. Katia Mollis, Ms. Francine Arlene, Mr. Ephraim Thompson, Mr. Leslie Brewster, and Mr. Sheldon Warner. Thank you for your dedication and endless support in ensuring SALISES events are successful. And lastly, but by no means least, thanks to the acting director of the SALISES for his exceptional leadership and foresight in providing a space where we can ventilate very important issues to the national and regional development. I am sure everyone here agrees that the initiative is very indispensable. So thank you, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for the great work you're doing during your stewardship. So again, panelists, audience, and support teams, thank you. We appreciate everyone's contribution towards the event, and I'd like to pass you all over now to the chair for closing remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Pere. And on my own personal behalf, I want to thank the presenters for making the time. It's so difficult these days to make time in our schedules for certain things that we may not normally be doing, like attending SALISES Fora. But thanks for making that time to share your views, to share your experiences in particular with the global online public and with the society at large in relation to what would be an ongoing pressing concern for years to come. I talked particularly about online delivery. I hope that the issue of the virus won't be with us for years to come, but we have to grapple with its legal, political, economic, and social challenges at all levels. And I thank you all for being part of a discussion that is necessary and I guess would continue as we try to grapple with the COVID-19 virus and its new variants and modalities. I thank you all. I want to hand over to the acting director, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for his final words on this forum this morning. Dr. St. Bernard.
Thank you very much, Dr. McCree, and for your handling of the session today. As usual, superlative job. I must say that this is the third of the series of forums that we plan to have and continue during most of 2022. And this particular forum is basically a follow-up to our first on the topic, managing the national education system. And after the second forum, which dealt with the theme, we felt that we needed to exhaust the matter a bit further, and we assembled a panel which we felt would do complete justice to the issue. And as usual, it was not an easy task to pull the panel together, but we did succeed in doing so. And I have to say, and I'm sure my feelings are going to be supported by everyone else who has witnessed what happened today, that the panel did a super job in terms of addressing the issues and creating and stimulating the discussion which we have had. So again, as everyone else, I want to express my profound gratitude to each member of the panel who at short notice responded positively to our invitation to participate in this session, and it was a show worth witnessing. As I say this, I can say so far, when I look at the virtual participation, we are encouraged that the numbers look good, but certainly we wish to have wider reach. And insofar as we expect to have wider reach, we intend to really use all media possible to reach wider audiences. Already we are thinking of students in the secondary school system. We are thinking of politicians, public sector workers, and even persons in private sectors, NGOs, the international community. Of course, there are different media by which we can share what we have been doing so far in SALISES with them. Already, the past forums that we have had are on a website located in SALISES Muna. It's on the SALISES regional website. It is my intention to share the link with everyone so that you can go and see what we have been doing so far. And this particular session will also be placed on that website. We also have intentions of actually producing documents out of these sessions. Of course, we shall do so in discussion with the presenters so that we have their permission, their relevant permissions to further develop the materials to facilitate different dimensions of communication that we wish to pursue with the various publics and stakeholders who we think need to benefit from the information and the insights shared in this kind of forum. So I expect to communicate with all of the presenters so far, and I want to really thank all of the presenters. So far, we have had 18 presenters in our 3 forums. As we go forward into next year, I can only suggest that there are a few topics of interest that we are looking at. We certainly want to address the issue of the Concordat. That's one of the issues we are looking at. We're also looking at human rights and migration issues that emerge in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean. Certainly the question of the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago and realizing it. It is a very important instrument of national development, and we want to really approach that issue and engage discussions. Crime and violence are among issues we want to look at. Youth unemployment, underemployment, and youth participation. Those are other issues that we are targeting for next year. So I think generally speaking, SALISES as a policy development institute providing opportunities for academics and others to engage in research and also facilitating training in policy development and related issues, have been doing what it is supposed to do. Generally speaking, there is a need to improve the visibility of SALISES, and I think this forum is just one of the mechanisms that we are embracing to let everyone know that SALISES means business. SALISES is there to support development process and development agendas in the region. And SALISES is no longer the best kept secret that some people seem to think it is. So we want to enhance the visibility of SALISES. We trust that we are doing a good job so far in that regard, and we look forward to continuing well into the new year. So again, thanks to everyone who has had a part to play in the success of this forum and in the other 2 forums that we have had so far. We look forward to continuing them into the new year. And before I break, I just want to take this opportunity to wish every one of you participating in this forum the very best wishes for the holiday season that is upon us. I also wish each and every one of you continued safety as you negotiate with the COVID pandemic and emergent variants, and certainly best wishes and a prosperous and healthy new year to all of you as you go forward, you and your families and friends and associates. Best wishes to all of you for the holiday season and for 2022 and beyond. So thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your day. And I trust that you had a very enjoyable stay with us for the past 2.5 hours. Thank you very much all.